As if the news itself was not funny enough. They wanted to analyze. All right, I'll analyze it. It's ridiculous. Oh, I don't guess that's what they had in mind. As long as all local conditions make man believe that all sentences require conclusion and that periods are much scarcer than question marks, local conditions will remain in charge. In the beginning, well, there were several here together, that's what I was looking for. In the beginning, life was arranged just like man thought it was. But then as he began to think even more, he started to suspect that it was not like that at all. But now he is convinced it is not. But it still is. It almost reaches a point, as some news item mentioned tonight and several nights ago. It can reach a point that a man could listen to some of this with a fairly sane and ordinary ear and say, well, some of the ideas might be interesting or it makes me chuckle, but the idea that in some way somebody can be encouraged and much less taught or in any way given additional information that someone might be able to think more has got to be ridiculous, because it would be like you're drowning in the ocean and you reach for help around to somebody and they throw water on you. Desperation, similes, but that's it. You can pick out any one you want to. That one's not, you could say that's not very great, but nothing's great. It's like anything you want. Help, I'm suffocating. You have somebody to help you and they throw air at you. When you are operating in what appears to be, by all views, a closed system, then to believe that there is some extraordinary help of any kind, under whatever guise, whatever name, from that same kind of self-satisfied, self-stabilized intellectual view is at least would be one high point of insanity. Because if you are inside of a closed system and you turn to someone else and you ask for help, where the hell are they going to get help? But life provides an arrangement in such a way that everyone believes, even though they know better. If you recall, I tried to give you a description the last news show. All this thing about the people know things that they don't know, or that people know things subconsciously. The stomach's a stomach, and the stomach knows it's a stomach, but the stomach can't talk. And if you got any sense, you say, well, the stomach don't need to talk. The stomach, it fulfills its main job, which is what? Stomaching. It's not talking. You don't need your stomach to talk. But the stomach knows it's a stomach. You got to understand that. If it did not know it's a stomach, you might get up some morning and it has in some way, let's assume, crawled up during the night, your spinal cord, and is now trying to fulfill the function, say, of your larynx or your brain. The stomach knows it's a stomach. It just has no need whatsoever to comment thereon. In the same way, anything that anybody, me, you, it's a shame. Do you think that Aristotle actually had a private phone number and they just wouldn't give it out? But any great thinker, anything that anyone can say, with ordinary people that becomes totally irrelevant to say that they know it. But anything can be said. We're back to the idea of a closed system. Anything can be said. There's no such thing as great information or startling information. To certain ears, you can hear something and it seems to be striking in the sense of, Jesus, I would have never thought of that. But it's not like something that someone stepped off of a spaceship, an alien, and said something totally new, because we've been through that. If somebody did, which is the dream of all religions and cultures, pushed to their max, if that did happen, and somebody actually stepped off and said something absolutely new, and you were there to hear it, what would you hear? Starts with a G. It's not German. It's gibberish. If it was totally new, you'd go, what in the hell was that? Now, it don't mean it had to be another language. It was just this language. And the creature says, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that finally Hollywood closed down those B movies so that, I can look like somebody. And he says, I am here to tell you that which you want to hear, something brand new. And you go, all right, and you can't hear it. If it's within a closed system, no one is going to come up with anything that has any validity. In the same way, back to the drowning man in water and the suffocating man in air, no one has any new information. There is nowhere to get it from. It is a matter of fact that the way in which a person could be structured and wired up, that they would have never thought of it. And if they never thought about it, that means one thing. And what is that? That they didn't need to think of it. But, back to where we were, everyone knows all of this. You agree to that? In the same way, not subconsciously, not in some strange way that can't be talked about, even though it can't be talked about, it's when people come up with the idea of the subconscious, etc. at all. Not all. Is everyone knows that, no, there's nothing new, but if you knew that, then you're probably helping lay out the burial clothes of Ibsen. You got duck feathers stuck between your teeth, hollering, who killed the dream? And you go. Everyone knows that there is no new information. But if an ordinary mind left it at that, if life would leave it at that, then no one, everyone seems to like these kind of picturizations. No one, no decent, sane person would get up tomorrow, put on a suit and tie, and go to fucking work. Well, not unless they were starving. And if you're actually starving, you wouldn't go to that trouble. You just go steal some food from somebody smaller than you were, like your stomach intended. So everyone must operate on the same basis, that there is a hole in the system, that we are all going to look down at the universe, the life of man, as a nice little Barbie doll, mold injection, plastic, and look down and you'll see the point where the mold, where the plastic was injected, and you look at it, and if you're ordinary, you think, God, it's a miracle. That it's the way out. And of course the way in, if there's a way out, there's a way in, that there is secret information somewhere. The things that are troubling my soul can be answered if I just look far enough. And of course, if you look far enough, you will never hurt the duck. If you look far enough, you will never have to confront the fact of, instead of worrying about Erasmus's phone number, what if I rang myself up? Nah. Be more fun to try and get hold of Moses, Buddha. Okay, Gerda. But notice that the things are arranged back to one of the news items. There's always somebody that seems apparently in the studio that believes that some of this gets off of the primary subject. It was a short item, I think, although it doesn't specify that it's a kind of variation of some of the creation myths, that in the beginning life is arranged just like man thought it was. That would be very close to a stomach thinking, if it could think. 3, 4. Now, man, back to playing this game of everything being as it is and yet playing that it could be otherwise, which if you can think, you can do that. If you can't think, I know you can't do that, and take a goodie. For you people up north, an Anison. And for you people further south, a Standback. Those of you from out of town don't know about that brand. It just, under certain local conditions, it was the aspirin, the pain reliever of choice amongst certain people prone to live in the southern areas of the United States, such as Mississippi and South Carolina, and seemed apparently attracted to such occupations as bricklaying, drywall work, and professional drinking. And the name of the product was Standback. It may still be, and nobody ever seemed to appreciate it. The name of the thing is Standback. Of course, they'd had any sense that it said that, before they went into bricklaying and drinking. Back to the myth. Back to the myth. Remember, imagine that things are the same as they are and yet different. That if man could think to begin with in a certain way, and everyone did this, you don't have to play really mythical history because you did as a child. You look around, and there is no real good time frame. I have to start playing words and say there's almost a split second that could range from hours to weeks to days, but it's sort of it's when you first, I guess psychologically people would want to say it's when you first came to the realization that there was an equation, that there was a difference between you and the outside world, and you began to try and converse with your parents and ask questions and what's going on, and there was a sense that I could be in some sort of little raft or craft by myself out here, and you begin to look for help. But there's some split second, figuratively speaking, in there that would apply to this news item. That is, in the beginning, life is as man thought it was. Like your first thoughts, whatever they are, just trust me. You won't do yourself any harm to believe this. I know that sounds better, because if I don't do it that way, then I'd be inclined to send you a bill for medical treatment. It's like the first thoughts before there seems to be any extrinsic feedback or input from other people. Once they realize you can think, which your parents realize you can think as soon as you go, no, or yes, or daddy, then they know they got you, which is not your parents, of course, it's civilization. Then it doesn't have to worry, because it already gave you the Kleenex and the hot thermos and gave you the advice, and now you're coming out with it, and it knows you're all right. Back to, for there's sort of a split second there, when you first think, and whatever it is you think about life, and I'm not going to put words, this was a little dramatic. When you first think, you go, and whatever it was you thought that life was, you were right. But don't worry about descriptions. That's only ordinary people. Then you'd fall into being a Freudian or a psychologist or a philosopher, because then you're going to go, well, what? It doesn't matter the crap what. You went. And life was like you thought it was. But things have got to progress. Then, sometime out of that split second, post-Big Bang, then is when you really start becoming civilized and you become a regular thinker. You start to. And this is not a joke. There's been several items I know lately, perhaps some of you can see the connection now, news items about this. After that, that would not be enough. You would stay absolutely immature by any standard. You would have like the brain fired up like an engine, but it was never put in gear. Like you cranked up a car and you would sit there forever. For it to ever go any further, after you first thought, remember that signifies that you first thought, and what you first thought about life, about how it's arranged, you were right. It was arranged just like you thought. But then to ever get it in gear, very shortly after that, whatever shortly means, right after that, you begin to suspect that it's not. If we were ordinary psychologically driven bulldozers, then we could start trying to explain, well, yes, your parents misled you. Civilization fell apart, all sorts of erroneous information, damaged data. You got misled. Your mind got confused. If you're sane, to take that definition, everybody's mind gets confused. That's growing up. You have to begin to suspect that things are not as you thought they were. Now remember, you will do yourself no harm and lots of good if you're the strange person to take this and run with it. Life is just like you thought it was to start with, which won't do. The same way that you had to start looking after yourself and not doing it in your pants and hitting your sister with a brick. The same way you had to grow up. You had to get past that very shortly. And the next step was you begin to suspect that it's not. Forget anything else. Forget, well, somebody made me do it. No, they didn't. Your parents didn't mislead you. Some trauma didn't happen to you and then you got confused. No. If you were sane, forget people that say they're sick. If you were sane, this is what happened. At first, life was arranged just like you thought. But then you got to thinking a little bit better and you begin to suspect, no, it's not. And now, once you're mature, and humanity, this was actually about humanity, but it's you too. After that, now, if you're ordinary, you are convinced that it's not. Do you see the progression? And it is progression. Everyone has lived it. You have lived it genetically. Humanity has lived it, and they continue to play it out. It's known as running from Eastern Standard Time, to use a local description, to Pacific. It is running continuously. It repeats itself every day. It's the brand new fad, the brand new fashion. You don't have to check with women's wear daily. All you got to do is peer toward the east, and if the sun comes up, there it is. That was, I guess, an aside allegory at no additional charge. I'll bill me personally later based upon your response. The progression is that life is just like you thought. Life is just like man thought. If you want the wider scope of the news story, the original version, is life is arranged just like men thought it was. Always was, always was. But the next step to put this engine in gear, and we're talking about the mind, of course, we're not talking about the stomach, we're not talking about the areas of man's physical life in which he shares certain common characteristics with elephants. Not those who sing in boys' choirs, but real elephants. In fact, they don't even have any pachyderms as far as I know in Vienna. If they do, they're not in the phone book. It goes from life being arranged just like man thought it was to him suspecting it's not. But you see that that is at the heart, if you're following this, of where all psychology now takes over. In times past, that was more the purview of religion, that man had run amok, gone astray. You know, like the Garden of Eden. Let's take the Western version right quick. Remembering that I'm using religion in its fullest sense, that it is not religion, either with a capital or small r, whichever one you want to use. But it is simply the prime example of all culture at any particular time and place. If you took the Garden of Eden as being everything was just right, which is fairly acceptable to Jews and Christians and all sorts of other people, that yeah, life was just right, which fits that. That is, life was arranged just like men thought it was. Adam and Eve looked around, and there was no subconscious mind, there were no evil spirits. It was paradise. Things were just like they appeared to be, just like they thought they were. And then something happened. From the ordinary view, it went downhill, that it was a detrimental occurrence. It was a necessary occurrence because shortly after that, if you want to follow the story right quick, they made the gods mad and they threw them out and said, get out, put on a suit and tie, and go to work. And the curse and all that. But there was another way to look at it, is this news item, is like once you're driven past that first post-Big Bang cranking up of the intellectual engine, wherein at first you look and everything, it is paradise, it is, which is just simply validity is in your face. That everybody's staring at a point-blank wall and there's no way around it. There is no subconscious, there is no unconscious, there are no traumas, there are no goblins, evil spirits. You just look and things are as they are. Give me a break. You're going to go millennia like that? Infinity? Everybody's sitting there, Adam and Eve, looking at each other and go, well, what do you want to do? Well, what do you want to do? And how you've done it all. As soon as they ate and screwed and looked at each other and said, well, what do you want to do? I don't know, what do you want to do? There it is. Up to that point, life was arranged just like men thought it was. But that will not do. Things would not have gone on. So they had to go from that. Now remember, like being thrown out of the garden, and the stories culturally take that as being a backward step. It was a necessary forward step because once they were out of the garden, to use that story right quick to carry on, is then they begin to suspect that things were not, or things are not as we thought. But look at their view right quick. What else could you think? Everything was going along, if I may say so, swimmingly. And then this big guy went, hey, get a job, get out of here, get it. And then they got outside and they began to suspect. Remember, they began to suspect that things are not arranged like we thought they were. Well, hey, I mean, are we going to give out IQ prizes? What else would you have thought? There you were in paradise, and then whatever it was that occurred, something happened, and suddenly you're out of paradise. You begin to suspect something, and the suspicion is, well, wait a minute, we were wrong. In other words, we thought everything was just hunky-dory. Everything was just right, that life, according, as per this news item, that life was arranged just like they thought it was. But then suddenly it was not. You understand? It was not. And so what else would you suspect? The first stage, suspect. Well, I suspect things have changed, Eve. What do you think? And she goes, well, I didn't marry you because you were a dumbbell, and she agrees. It is progress. It is progress up to a point. And the real progress is when it says, and now he is convinced it is, and now he is convinced it is contemporaneous forever. It is all time zones put together because Adam and Eve, as soon as they got outside, it didn't take them long not to just suspect that things were not as they thought, but become convinced of it. And they're still doing it. Humanity is still playing it out. That is a true benchmark of being civilized, being mature. And the common definition and description of maturing and wising up, as best you can at street level, is that you're now convinced. Look around. The more educated from the ordinary view, the more sophisticated, etc., that you are, the more, they might not want to use the words, but they would agree, that people will, they say, yes, I am convinced. You're right. Life is not as it appears to be. I mean, that will pass muster as being a philosophical insight anywhere on this planet. No, I'm darn well convinced things are not as they appear. I may not know exactly why, and I may not be sure of the basis, but that's for sure. I mean, you look around, things are not as they appear. Men no longer suspect it, not if they reach that level of just being ordinarily walking around sane, civilized, and educated and sophisticated. They are convinced of it. That is the sign of being truly civilized. The news item had the decency not to point out other things that is a sure sign of. Extreme witlessness, severe lack of any depth perception, acute hearing problems, So do you follow the progression? Would you like to recap? Well, this is not my train. No, recap. We don't need a red cap. That at first life is as man thinks it is. Which this is not theory. Again, some of you I'm sure can do this. Your stomach right now, if it could think, what your stomach thinks about life, or those of you that are more erotically inclined, your little private parts. Everything about you personally that does not speak has its own understanding of what the world, how it's arranged. Assume you're sane. And so with the rest of your body that you're not a hypochondriac or something. Remember, that's Southern people who build up imaginary illnesses in their mind. A man who worked for the Standback Company told me that years ago. The parts of your body that do not ordinarily speak, if they're sane, and if you're sane, then they're sane. Those subparts of you. Your stomach's knowledge of how the world is arranged is correct. The way your stomach feels that life is arranged is how it's arranged. Because if your stomach's sane, your stomach gets hungry, and through whatever miracles, the way you look at, food comes down. It digests it, it takes out what it needs, it disposes of the rest. Life is arranged the way that a sane stomach expects. Livers, every other part of you. That is the same condition that this news item describes that originally a man's mind. The way it perceived of life being arranged was correct. Forget how. Well, yes, things were good at one time and now they're bad. But once it was paradise and now Jesus. Everything looks like Cleveland. Things haven't changed. That's just the easiest story. That's just tales for kids. Yes, we got thrown out of paradise. You got thrown out of paradise here. You went from life being as you thought it was, which won't do, because if you talk, it's not like it was. As soon as you talk, as soon as Adam went and turned to Eve and went, Jesus, you You come around here often, or what was the first thing you said? Like, what is that thing? I guess that's what she said to him. As soon as they said the first word, that's when it went from life being arranged as men thought it was, because as soon as they said something, it was no longer arranged like they thought it was. And forget how they thought it, doesn't matter, because it's no longer valid. As soon as they spoke, it was no longer arranged as they thought it was, which it was. But it's no longer true, because as soon as they talked, they began to suspect, no, it's not. And then, to reach the climax as best they can of being civilized and mature, is they are now convinced, now being always, they are convinced it's not. The evidence being all forms of education, all forms of psychology, philosophy, all social commentary, all criticism, any comment that the ordinary have about life, like, well, I'll tell you what I think. What they're saying is, yes, I'm convinced things are not arranged like we think, which is just a slight variation. They might want to argue. They're saying they're not arranged as they should be. Because if they're arranged as they should be, then we'd be talking to people. We would indeed be preaching to the already converted. But you've got to remember that if you look at this as being a version of preaching to the already converted, you got to also realize that to do it correctly, you've got to turn it inside out, erotically stroke it, bathe it, sin it, and tell it, get the hell out of here, or something. Because you can't stop there. You go from, if you looked at this as being a circular trip, which if you wanted to, except it's actually a spiral, but you can't talk like that to children in the audience, that life is arranged like you thought it was, if you're a man, little m. So arranged like you thought it was, then you suspect, no, it's not, then you're convinced it's not. Remember the last part of that news item, which rather than me fill in a new version, which this is saying something else, I assume you get by now. It goes from that life is arranged just like man thought it was, then you suspect that it's not. Now he's convinced. A whole line of real long ellipsis, but it still is. That would be someone who understands what they've been through, of being able to run back the genetic tape of history through yourself one more time. Because one more time is all it takes. I mean, once you can do it. You remember that news item said that a man, once he knew how to do it, he decided, I'll take the genetic tape and run it back through me one more time. And the part that went unsaid in that was if you know how to do it, which was the opening gamut of that news item, if you know how to do it, then one more time is all you need. You've already been running it through accidentally, mechanically. Everybody is. Or if you want another way, you're the recorder in life is force-feeding the tape through you over and over and over, as it's supposed to. But once you understand it, you can run this whole news item. Life was just like I thought it was before I started thinking. But as soon as I started thinking, I went, Mama! Or, I ain't going to eat no goddamn turnips. You know, what it was you first said, and as soon as you did that, then life was not arranged like you thought it was. Now you begin to suspect it's not arranged like I thought it was. Or else, why in the hell would they try to make you who you trusted? The nice woman whose breast you suckled now says, here, have a turnip. How did I go from such a comfy pleasure to her saying, here, suck on a turnip? That first stage of progress is you begin to suspect. But you understand, the more we go, I assume you see more and more of the kind of ha-ha humor and saying suspect that things are not arranged like you thought. Because as soon as this begins to happen, as soon as you become a functioning intellectual creature, things are not as they were. And so, what else can you do but suspect that things are not arranged like I thought they were? And then, and you can't stay there, or you'd be, slobbering and, schlamealing around the rest of your life like a kid, like some immature. So to get mature, you go from suspecting things are not like you thought they were. That's childish. Hey, I'm mature. I'm a grown person. I know they're not. I'm convinced. The rerunning of it. To get out of that was what the rest of the news item says in parentheses, not then, but it still is. That is, that you realize, so that's where I've been. You get off the fucking butt.